All right, everybody. Now we're live on all of our platforms. Hello to everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the presentation. Happy Friday to you. Hopefully, you're having a fantastic Friday wherever you are. We are going to have a jam-packed presentation tonight, and which is a good thing, which is a very, very good thing. But before we do, let's go ahead and give out our the business aspect of everything, because we have to let everybody know where they can find us, where they can go, and who we are, and all this other stuff. First of all, I want to let everybody know this is being aired on the Unexplained Network. So UNX Network, and if you want to go to that site, you can certainly do so, unxnetwork.com. Head over yonder, so we are live there. So we're very, very happy to be a part of the Unexplained Network. A great community, fantastic shows. And so we're happy to be a part of that family over there. Now, if you want to go to my website because you're bored and have nothing else better to do, you can certainly do so. Just go to Bishop James Long, www.bishopjameslong.com, and that's it. And if you want to, just head over there, and there you go. That's what it is. There's a lot there, by the way. This show is podcasted for those of you who don't know. But if you want to, you can go to my site, Bishop James Long, follow that up with a .com, and click on the podcast link and scroll on down yonder. You'll see the Bible Study Podcast, the Sacred Division Paranormal Show, which this is it, and then the Wednesday Meditation Bible Study as well. So those are there for you. Also on my site, Bishop James Long, follow that up with a .com. Click on the books link. And I want you to buy every single book, every book that's there. Every one of them. Go ahead and buy them. Every single one of them. And before the trolls start throwing the shade, buy every book. Before the trolls start throwing shade, I'm the author of these books. I own them. They're copyright. And as a community, we have, I'm your guy. 100% of the profits is going to the MKS Kids Foundation. Oh, so Linda, you didn't stick around to hear that immediately. I always lead them into this, buy all the books. Oh, I knew you were a fraud. I knew you were fake. But then there comes the little other information. 100% of the profits goes to the MKS Kids Foundation. They're an orphanage that we are partnering with. They are desperately needing assistance. And so again, it's my book. I own them. I have every right to receive as much money as I want from selling them. But as a community, and I say a community because I can write 500 books. If no one buys them, it doesn't mean anything. But the books are there. So when you buy them, you're helping the MKS Kids Foundation. And I think that's fantastic. Really, they're desperately needing some assistance. They're on TikTok. They keep getting dinged all the time for not professional background and all the lighting and all this. They're an orphanage in Uganda. They're not going to have stage lighting. They're not going to have perfect lighting. They're just not. So it's like, come on, just stop bothering them. But nonetheless, they're always getting dinged with that. Really? That's what we're going to have that conversation about your pronouns? Oh, for God's sakes. Will people stop? Everybody just wants to be offended by something. Something. They got to be offended by something. My dog, call me, my pronoun is a dog. How's that? Rough. Anyway, so just head over there. I'm so glad I'm a Generation X. Also, you can go to bishopjameslong.com. It's the MKS Kids Foundation, MKS. And matter of fact, if you go to my site, bishopjameslong.com, and click on the fundraiser link, if you scroll down, they do have a fundraiser that you can also directly apply to help them out. So this is our way of trying to help. And that's what we do. Well, thank you very much. And also, if you want to go to the church's site, so if you want to visit us, who we are, what we're about, what we believe, well, just simply go to usocc.org. That's all. And if you head on over there, and you can check us out. We have night prayer coming up later on tonight. And night prayer is at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay? So those are hopefully what you need to know. I don't know if there's any other major presentations that we have. Of course, we have a very special week coming up, which is next week. Yeah, the training manual. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I have the I appreciate you mentioning that, by the way. So on my site, bishopjameslong.com, there is several books. Well, certainly one that's related to the paranormal, and that is actually one of the book is called a training manual, Paranormal's training manual. So this is just for years and years of my experience of being in the paranormal community, and so I have that available. There are several books there. There's the parables. There are the archangels, the paranormal training manual, clergy handbook of prayers. There's also the spiritual blessings. My mom's cookbook is there. So there's a lot. There's a lot of information there for you. So if you want to, you can head over there and pick up whatever you want to pick up. How's that? All right. So yeah, and so look, let me just say this very quickly. Good. Thank you, SJF. Thank you. And of course, the MKS, they thank you as well. Well, thanks, Steve. That's very nice of you. That's very nice. Steve says you explain scripture in an excellent manner. I appreciate that, guys. That's I have not been to it. No, I've not been there. Not been out of the States. I would love to. But we're gonna be heading there one day. You never know. You never know where we're gonna go. So. The meditation, okay, Anne Marie, that would actually go when you go to bishopjameslong.com and you click on the podcast link. And if you click on the podcast link, you'll scroll down and you'll see where it says the meditation, and it's there for you. So the Wednesday's meditation we just did, it's there. And then of course next Wednesday, it's Holy Week. Now I want to let everybody know now. Next Friday is Good Friday. I have never, ever, ever done a paranormal show on Good Friday. Never. I don't believe in it. I think it's wrong. I think it's not a time to talk Bigfoot and monsters and ghosts and goblins and UFOs. Every single Good Friday, I do a presentation on the supernatural miracle of the crucifixion. And I go into great detail of what happened during that time, things that I learned in the seminary that I had never known, and I share that information. Thank you. And I share that information. It's intense. It's graphic. Because I think that it's something that I don't like to sugarcoat that, and nor should we. And so we go into a lot of detail into the crucifixion, and so and we're also going to talk about other miracles as well. So Good Friday has always been, for 23 years since I've done a podcast show, has always been every Good Friday. It's always been that. I just don't believe in doing a paranormal show. So anyway, just a heads up on that. Okay. All right. As you can hear, that is the cue. Well, today's your daughter's 14th birthday. What's your daughter's name? We got a birthday. Is it Zoe? Is that how it, or is it Zoe? A lot of people. Yes. Well, everybody, it's Zoe's birthday. And you know what? I think that would be a fantastic. I think, we got to do this. We got to do this. Hold on. Here we go, Zoe. Mr. Producer, sing along. Here we go. Mr. Producer. He's not singing. Mr. Producer, we practice this. We practice this. Now, Mr. Producer, come on. Happy birthday, Zoe. 14 years old. Man. For those of you having a birthday. There we go. I'm not singing. Happy birthday. Yep. Mr. Producer is drumming it. There we go. All right. So for all of you who are having a birthday this week, today, Mr. Producer on April 1st will be 70 years old. 70. There we are. Spare no expense. Spare no expense. Oh, yours birthday is Monday too. Wow, we got a lot of birthdays. So happy birthday out there, everybody. So hopefully your birthday is fantastic and you're enjoying it. You're eating a lot of cake, and there we are. All right, let's get into the presentation, everybody, because we have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we talk about these cases. Let me say, first of all, I was friends with Lorraine Warren. I have been in the paranormal community for 35 years. And in that 35 years, primarily the last 25, I have made great friends within the paranormal community. So people who, I've met all of them. I'm friends with a lot of them. Good friend. Chip Coffey is a dear friend of mine. Andrea is just amazing. God love her. Andrea Perron. She's a beautiful soul. She grew up in the Conjuring house. I'm friends with Andrea. I'm friends with Jason McLeod, who actually was trained by the Warrens. Keith Age, of course, the Booth brothers. I've been on several of the documentaries, their shows. They're on the Sci-Fi Channel. And, of course, all the ghost adventures and the taps and basically, I have had the opportunity to meet and become friends with quite a few people within the paranormal community. And one of those individuals that I was able to become friends with is Lorraine Warren. I did not get to meet Ed, but I was blessed to be able to speak to Lorraine often. And I had the opportunity even to bring her on my show at one time. Ryan Buell's a great friend of mine, just a sweetheart of a guy. And I tell you, so I've had opportunities to speak to her about the cases that she worked with her husband, off air and on air. And I want to present some cases tonight and share some of my notes that I have after, speaking with her and writing them down, just so that I will remember them. Because, Lorraine Warren, the Warrens were, they were trailblazers. Now, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Amityville Horror case, the Enfield Poltergeist case, the Perron family case, which is the Conjuring house, the Annabelle, and the Smurl haunting. I was able to finally get to see Annabelle. After all these years, I just couldn't get to where Lorraine lived. She invited me up to visit, but I couldn't get there because, I live in Kentucky. She lives pretty far away. So, and the idea that they never took Annabelle out of the case is just simply incorrect. They did take Annabelle many times out of the museum. So there was all this, they never take them out. They never take them out. That's not true. That is not true at all. Matter of fact, Ed and Lorraine often went to conferences. Well, not paranormal conferences. Paranormal conferences really wasn't a thing, but they did a lot of presentations at colleges. So I had the opportunity to finally get to see Annabelle in Lexington, Kentucky. There we go. And I will say this, there's no question in my mind that there's something attached there. You just, and it's not because of the atmosphere, the red lighting and all this other stuff. No, it's, you could feel it. Yeah, you could feel it. Oh, does she care? See, here's the deal. Let me just, that's a good question. Jenny says that she didn't care that you took a picture of her. I don't care if she cares or not, because it's not Annabelle. It's the demonic that's attached to the item. So I don't give any type of demonic power or control over what I do in my free will. And so for me, that's very important to understand. A doll cannot be possessed. There is no such thing. Human beings are possessed. You have a demonic attachment to that item. And because of that, it can animate or appear to animate right in front of you. Whether sometimes it blinks, it moves. And that's all a part of it. In the same manner, there's no such thing as performing an exorcism on a house. That does not exist. That's absurd. You don't perform an exorcism on a house. You bless the house. You perform the exorcism on the demonic entity that has infested itself within the home. And that's also very important to understand, okay? All right. So tonight we're going to talk about, give you some a rundown of what happened on each of these cases. And then I'm going to give you my perspective from an exorcist, and not only as a friend of Lorraine's, but also as clergy after speaking to her and getting her perspective. So yeah, it's a good, Sikorsky, the reason is because we want to bind that demonic entity to that item. So, and that is crucial. So you can force that entity to be bound to the item. Now I have next week where we're going to talk about, of course, is Good Friday. And the week after that, I'm going to probably talk about some paranormal objects. So I'll bring some of my objects here. I don't particularly like it because I don't want these items here in this studio, certainly. But I'm going to be bringing some of my items that I've collected through the years because we are on the Unexplained Network and it's brand new. So, okay. Again, for those of you who are on TikTok, we're not going to troll, and we are not here to talk politics. Just enjoy. And if you can't, you're going to be blocked, plain and simple. I won't entertain rude comments. You won't get my attention at all. I won't be screaming or yelling at you. I'm not going to insult you. You'll just be blocked. So, okay. Let's go into the Smurl haunting. Let's start. There is something about a quiet house at night that most people never question. It feels natural, expected, even comforting. You walk through your home, you turn off the lights, and settle into that stillness, without giving a second thought, or at least most of us. The silence becomes part of that environment, something that fades into the background of your awareness. You assume that if something were wrong, if something were present, you would know it immediately. You would hear it. You would see it. There'd be some obvious, something undeniable. But that assumption is where cases like the Smurl haunting begins to unravel what we think we understand about fear. The Smurl haunting is one of the cases that Ed and Lorraine Warren worked. And I want to tell you about this case, because in this case, nothing begins in a way that announces itself. There's no single moment where everything just changes. There's no sudden eruption of chaos. Instead, what unfolds is something far more unsettling. A slow, deliberate shift in the environment. So subtle really at first that its explanation, I think, instead of fear. And by the time that explanation no longer works, well, it's already too late. Jack and Janet Smurl, they were not extraordinary people, I guess. They weren't rocket scientists or anything of this nature, famous. That's precisely what makes their story so difficult to dismiss. Jack, he was a Navy veteran, a man who lived within structure. He was very disciplined, routine. He was not prone to imagination, emotional exaggeration. That wasn't him. Janet was equally grounded. She was a mother. She focused on her family, her responsibilities, her faith. Their lives, they weren't dramatic. They were never have they ever tried to seek out attention, public attention. They're just quiet. Nothing in their background suggests a desire to fabricate something as disturbing as what they would later describe. So when they moved into their duplex In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, the expectation was simple: normalcy, stability. The home was actually modest, functional, unremarkable, and there was no widely known history that was attached to it, no stories of violence or tragedy that might later serve as an explanation. It was really, in every sense, just a house. And for a period of time, it remained exactly that. But then something began to change. Not suddenly, but gradually, in a way that made it almost impossible to identify the exact moment when normalcy ended. So the first indication that something was wrong did not come from something seen, but from something sensed. So Janet described a smell that would appear without warning, something foul, unmistakably organic, like decay. It was not subtle once it was noticed. It was the kind of smell that forces you to stop what you are doing and investigate. That's exactly what she did. She checked everything that could logically produce such an odor: trash, drains, food, anything that might have spoiled or gone unnoticed. There was nothing. There was no source, no explanation. And then just as suddenly as it appeared, the smell would disappear completely. Not fading gradually, not lingering in the air, but vanishing in a way that made it feel almost imagined. Gone like that. Except it wasn't imagined, because it returned again and again. Sometimes faint, sometimes overwhelming, but always without a source. And moderators, if you could do me a favor, just keep reminding, because we have a lot of people, new people coming in, just let people know that Bishop Long is recounting some cases from the Warrens. Now, there is something deeply unsettling about a smell that behaves that way. Thanks, Bill. Because it does not follow the rules that we expect. And I think that's, and we can pen that. I just want to keep making sure that we say this over and over and over and over, because we have people coming in that they don't know what we're doing. So smells are supposed to come from something. They're supposed to linger, to dissipate slowly, to have a cause that can be identified and removed. And when that does not happen, when the smell appears and disappears as if it has control over its own presence, well, that creates a quiet but persistent unease. Now, at first, the unease is just to ignore it, but it doesn't stay that way. Then the sound came next. So at first, they were so minor that they barely registered as anything unusual, like a knock. It was not loud or forceful, just enough to interrupt a thought. Something that could easily be explained away. Houses make noises, pipes shift, woods expand and contract. These are normal things, and that's exactly how Jack initially interpreted them. But the sounds did not behave normally. They did not follow a pattern. They did not correspond to any unidentifiable cause. They occurred at times when the house should have been completely still. Late at night, when everything else had settled into silence. Perhaps, most unsettling of all, they began to feel deliberate. Not random, not mechanical, but placed. Let me do this. I'm going to put this in here as well. That way, because when people coming into this, all the other social media platforms, that way people can see it. Okay. There we go. So Janet reached a point where really she said plainly that it was not the pipes, and that the moment was more important than what it seems. And so, because once natural explanation is rejected, even tentatively, the experience changes. The sound is no longer background noise. It becomes something that demands attention, something that invites interpretation. And once you begin to interpret it, you begin to listen differently. You begin to wait for it. And the knocking evolved into scratching. This was not the faint, distant sound of, something moving inside a wall. It was closer, more distinct. And at times it seemed to move from one location to another, as though whatever was causing it was not confined to a single space. Now, the logical explanation, animals. It held for a time, but it began to fall apart as the sounds occurred in places that didn't make sense. At times that did not align with normal pattern movement. The house, which had been predictable, began to feel uncertain. And uncertainty is where fear begins to take shape. Then came the movement of objects. At first, it was subtle enough to dismiss. A chair slightly out of place, an item not left where it had been, where it wasn't left. Or, these are the kinds of things people experience every day. And they're usually explained away without much thought. But in this case, the frequency increased. Thank you, Tracy Ann. And the pattern became more difficult to ignore. Jack would later describe these incidents. And Tracy Ann, if you could do that every 10 minutes, that would be great. Bill as well. Thank you. Or every 5-10 minutes. So Jack described these incidents in a way that is striking. He said that things would be there and then they would not be. And that he knew that he had not moved them. There's no embellishment in that statement. No attempt to dramatize. It was an observation, plain and direct. But here's the question. What made these incidents more unsettling was not that the objects were moving, but that they would sometimes return. So items that had been searched for carefully, repeatedly, would reappear in locations that had already been checked. This detail is critical because it removes the most common explanation, oversight. So when something appears in a place you've already searched, the possibility of simple human error becomes less convincing. Now, over time, the environment itself began to feel unreliable. And once you lose trust in your environment, you begin to lose trust in yourself. So the escalation into physical interaction, marked by a turning point, it just couldn't be ignored anymore. Sorry, this is driving me crazy. Okay. There's so much space there in the top. Just drives me nuts. All right, so Janet described an encounter in which she felt something grab her arm. Not brush against her, not lightly touch her, but grab her with enough force that she felt pressure. Now that distinction matters. It suggests weight, resistance, something that exists in a physical sense rather than a pure psychological one. And there is a moment in cases like this when the question shifts from what is happening to what is doing this. And that shift changes everything because it introduces the idea of intention. So Jack's experience reinforced that shift. He described being held down, fully awake, aware of his surroundings, unable to move. He could see the room, he knew where he was, but he could not respond. He couldn't resist. The combination of awareness and helplessness is one of the most unsettling aspects of such encounters. So he experienced sleep paralysis. Now, while such experiences can be compared to sleep paralysis, the broader context of ongoing disturbances, it complicates that explanation. Sleep paralysis does not move objects. It does not produce recurring environmental anomalies. It does not involve multiple witnesses experiencing related phenomena over an extended period of time. So at this stage, the case begins to take on a different character. It's no longer a question of unexplained events. It becomes a question of presence. The most disturbing claims in the Smurl case, the Warrens' case that they worked, are those that involve direct attacks on Janet. These accounts are difficult to discuss. They're the point at which skepticism becomes strongest. However, they are also at a point in which the case most closely aligns with historical descriptions of demonic oppression. So Janet described these encounters as attacks that she could not resist, emphasizing the sense of helplessness and violation. Her statement that it felt like being attacked by something she could not fight, well, that conveys more than spiritual struggle. It's a psychological experience of being overpowered by something that does not respond to resistance in a way that a human attacker would. These are not details that are easily fabricated for attention. They carry a level of personal exposure that most people would avoid unless they felt compelled to speak about. Remember, this is a family. This is a very structured family. Now, from a theological perspective, this stage represents a transition from infestation to oppression. The focus is no longer on environment, but on the individual. And the activity becomes targeted, deliberate, increasingly invasive. So the family's response was rooted in their faith. A prayer became a constant presence. The home was blessed in an attempt to remove whatever was causing the disturbances for a time, and these efforts appeared to have an effect. But the activity, it would lessen, sometimes significantly, creating a sense of relief. But that relief never lasted. The disturbances returned, and when they did, they often seemed even more intense than before. So that pattern, temporary cessation followed by escalation, that's one of the most troubling aspects of this case. It suggests not only persistence, but resistance. It creates the impression that whatever was present was not simply reacting, it was adapting. Now, the involvement of investigators, including Ed and Lorraine Warren, brought additional attention to the case. So, their conclusions, particularly the suggestion that multiple entities were present, at least one was non-human, another added layer of complexity. Now, I was friends with Lorraine. I talked to her about this case several times. She was 100% convinced that there was demonic issues in this home. And with the theological framework, this interpretation aligns with the concept of certainly demonic oppression. So whether one accepts that interpretation or not, the progression of the events in the Smurl case follows a pattern. It's just too difficult to ignore. The disturbances began with what's called sensory anomalies. It progresses then into environmental manipulation and escalates into physical interaction and ultimately focuses on the individuals themselves. And that progression is not random, it's structured. And keep in mind, folks, I'm not really necessarily paying attention to the chat because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chats open right now. So 9 chats. So this is not the only chat room that's open. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Smurl haunting is not a single event, but the cumulative effect of those events over time. Living in an environment where nothing can be trusted, sounds, objects, even one's own body can become a source of fear. Creates a level of psychological strain. So even if one were to dismiss the paranormal explanation entirely, all right, well, the experience itself remains deeply disturbing. The erosion of safety, constant anticipation of the next event, inability to find relief. And the question remains, even if part of this case is true, then it suggests that something entered that home, established the presence, gradually asserted control in a way that was not immediately recognized. It suggests patience, deliberation, and perhaps, I think most unsettling of all, intent. Because if something can exist in that way, quiet, observant, persistent, then the real question is not whether it happened once. The real question is how often it happens without anyone ever realizing what they were experiencing till it's already too late. In my opinion, based on what Lorraine told me on this case, I absolutely believe that there was something there. Now, I want to say that sleep paralysis in of itself is not necessarily demonic. And because immediately people want to say, well, all sleep paralysis episodes are demonic. That's simply not true. It is not true. And the reason being is because if it is demonic, you're going to have infestation manifestations. You'll have some form of manifestations, whether, like, for example, a demonic infestation, religious objects are desecrated. You'll hear bangings and scratchings and hitting of the walls or foul odor. There will be other manifestations that accompany the sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis can be explained. I had a neurosurgeon on my show about 10, 15 years ago, and he explained sleep paralysis from a neurosurgeon's perspective. So when you are sleeping, or when you're in the conscious state and you're slowly moving to the subconscious, you have that brief moment of time where the subconscious obviously takes control of the breathing, etc., because you're not aware of your breathing while you're sleeping. But the subconscious is also where you dream. And so if you have a sleep paralysis episode when you're just going to bed or you're waking up, and that's it, there's no other demonic infestation, there's no other manifestations, there's nothing else, you're having a sleep paralysis episode. Does not mean it's demonic. It's terrifying, because what's happening is when let's say you're going to sleep, and the subconscious is what projects the image. So in that brief transition period, you then look up and you see this ghastly figure in front of you, this demon, and you can't move. You can't talk. You can't scream. You're completely catatonic. And that's because you are in that stage of entering into REM, which is rapid eye movement, into sleep, and the subconscious is projecting that image. Many times, after about 30 seconds or so, when the consciousness takes control completely of the brain functions, then that image will disappear. And then you have your motor functions, you're able to talk, you're able to communicate. The old hag syndrome, this is where the old hag syndrome, it's sleep paralysis. If you're having these issues when you're going to bed or waking up, and that's it, there are no other manifestations, you're dealing with sleep paralysis episodes. Now, there are isolated sleep paralysis, which is otherwise known as ISP. There's also RISP, which is recurrent isolated sleep paralysis. Now, the neurosurgeon said that if, in fact, you have RISP, then you really should be tested for narcolepsy. So I think it's important to understand. Immediately people say, oh my gosh, I had this terrible thing. I saw this creature, this sleep paralysis. Is it a demon? And I always tell them, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And because if you have other demonic issues that are related to that, then yes, you could be dealing with a demonic issue. This family, I don't think, had any reason. They had no reason to lie. They weren't trying to get attention. They had clergy come in, and eventually it was remedied. But I do believe, based on what this happens, a classic case. So there are stages that leads to possession. The first stage is infestation, demonic infestation. You go out to a home or you go out to a location, you paranormal investigate. Allegedly, there are demonic activity there, and you're saying, come on, demon, I dare you to do something. Well, that's a form of invitation. I don't know what you're talking about, Rainbow. Who's wearing a pearl necklace? Anyway, so you have an attachment. And that attachment then, Rainbow got blocked. Well, too bad, Rainbow. You're not much of a rainbow anymore. It's a cloudy day. All right. So for those of you, I don't know, what are you going to do? Some people, they got to get attention on a Friday night because they're bored. Trolling clergy on Friday night. Whew. Okay. So demonic infestation is you have an attachment, you go home, religious objects are desecrated, smells, foul odors, scratching, punching. Well, scratching goes into oppression. It's affecting it's terrifying. You might see things on the corner of your eyes, shadows. Then it goes into what's called demonic oppression and obsession. Demonic oppression is when it begins to physically interact with you, meaning that it begins to bite you, scratch you, pinch you. Moving blankets, touching your feet or your body in the middle of the night. I've had cases where people say that they felt ice cold fingers rubbing on someone's legs, and right in the middle of the night. That's basically to cause the person's will to deteriorate, because the intellect and will, the demonic is trying to attack. And you're talking about past sleep deprivation. It's terrifying. Now you have what's called also demonic obsession. Now demonic obsession is when it begins to attack you on an intellectual level. So you begin to hear it. It interacts with you. It mimics schizophrenia. It's very aggressive. And the whole point of the oppression and obsession stage is to eradicate the intellect and will of the individual. And once that occurs, then you have what's called possession. So, and I think that's important to understand that. That way you can kind of have an idea of what this means. But I want to talk about the Amityville. The Amityville is next. Okay? Well, I appreciate it. All right. The Amityville case. Now, I talked to, can we give a confession in chat? Why would you confess your sins in front of everyone on TikTok? No. Interesting. No, that should not be done on a public chat forum. So, okay. Let's talk about anime. So, of course, I talked to. No. Let's not block him. He was just asking us a simple question. We only block people that are coming in and saying really nasty things. I don't want people blocked just because they have maybe a personal opinion, or if they ask a question, or, well, I don't really understand this. Why did you say this? That's fine. Blocking shouldn't be something. We don't block just because. We don't do that. We block for reasons that are justifiable, when people are rude and very disrespectful. That's where we don't allow. We don't allow that. So, well, okay, gotcha. B. Well, if he keeps doing that, then yeah, he will be blocked. So, okay, the Amityville Horror. I had the opportunity to speak to Lorraine several times about this. There are certain places that carry a reputation long before anyone steps inside them. Sometimes that reputation is built on rumor, sometimes on exaggeration. I'm still a Catholic priest, yeah. Sometimes on events that are so disturbing that they refuse to fade with time. The Amityville Horror is one of those cases that exists at the intersection of fact, fear, and something far more difficult, I think, to define. Now, what makes it particularly unsettling is not simply what was reported, but how quickly those reports escalated and how deeply they affected the people who experienced them. Now, to understand why this case has endured for decades, one has to begin before the Lutz family ever set foot in that house. So in November of 1974, in the home of 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York, became the site of a brutal crime committed by Ronald DeFeo Jr. In the early hours of the morning, DeFeo unalived 6 members of his family while they slept, moving methodically from room to room. What has always been particularly disturbing, I think, about the crime is not about just its violence, but the circumstances surrounding it. None of the victims woke up. There were no signs of struggle. Neighbors reported hearing nothing. It was as if the house itself absorbed the violence in the silence. Now, when the Lutz family purchased the home, just over a year later, George was aware of the history, and he got a good deal on it too. And the fact alone, that fact alone is enough, I think, to invite skepticism into any discussion of what followed. It's reasonable to assume that knowledge of such a crime could influence perception, create anxiety. But what makes the Lutz account difficult to dismiss outright is it's not a single claim, but the sheer number of experiences reported within a remarkably short period of time, just 28 days. So George and Kathy Lutz moved into the house with their children, expecting to begin a new chapter of their lives. That's great. The house itself was spacious, despite its history, and attractive. From the outside, there was nothing to suggest that anything was wrong. It looked like any other beautiful home in the quiet neighborhood. And that contrast between appearance and experience is one of the most unsettling aspects of this story. Now, there's something deeply disturbing about a place that looks normal but behaves in ways that are anything but. Now, the first indications that something was not right did not come in the form of dramatic events. Instead, it emerged like a subtle irregularities, the kind that can be easily dismissed if one is determined that you define a rational explanation. So George Lutz began to experience an unusual, persistent chill in the house. And this was not the kind of chill that comes from a draft or like a change of weather. It was described as something that seemed to follow him, lingering in certain areas of the house, regardless of temperature or heating conditions. Even when the house was warm, he felt cold. So the environment around him was not responding to physical reality. And at that time, George became increasingly preoccupied with the fireplace. He found himself drawn to it in a way that he later struggled to explain, spending long periods of time tending to the fire. He became obsessed. And this behavior marked a subtle but important shift in his personality. Now, I'm going to share something with you that I don't think many people have put together. Right. Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate you guys being here. Okay. Yes, there we go. I appreciate you guys being here, and I have a lot of chats open, guys, so please understand that I'm not really entertaining questions at the moment because I have so many chats that right now I'm just doing a presentation. But George became obsessed with his fire. Obsessed. And I think that's important to understand. And the reason being is because there is a particular demon in the scripture, and I'm not going to mention the name of the demon, where a particular tribe would sacrifice their children and toss their children in the fire. This particular demon, Lorraine was convinced that George became obsessed with. And his obsession with fire, especially in the fireplace, I think was a subtle hint of what was occurring. George was involved in some very black magic, some very heavy things that are quite dangerous and that would lead one to a dark road. Those around George began to notice that he was becoming withdrawn, irritable, distant. The change was gradual. It was unmistakable. It was as though something in the house was affecting him in a way that went beyond simple stress or discomfort. Now, Kathy Lutz reported her own experiences. They were equally unsettling, but in a different way. He was very heavily involved in occult. She described sensations of being touched, not in a vague or ambiguous manner, but in a way that felt intentional. And there were moments when she believed she heard voices, faint, indistinct, as though something was speaking just beyond the edge of perception. And the experiences, it didn't occur in isolation. They were part of like a pattern that seemed to be building. And as the days passed, the disturbances became more pronounced, and doors were reported to open, close at their own, sometimes violently. The windows would slam shut without warning, even in the absence of wind. There were reports of foul odors, appeared suddenly, and then disappeared without explanation. Similar to those described in the case of alleged oppression. But the smells were not constant. Their unpredictability, I think that's what made them more disturbing. They would appear moments when the house was otherwise quiet. And one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the Amityville case involves what has been described as black slime. That's what Lorraine described it as. Thick substance that reportedly seeped from the walls and keyholes. Lorraine said it started out almost like it was oily, and then it was very thick. And whether interpreted as literal or exaggerated, the imagery, it's unsettling. So the idea of a house producing something organic, something that appears to come from within its structure, challenges the boundary between the physical and the natural. It suggests not just a presence, but a kind of contamination. So the experiences reported by the children add another layer of complexity to the case. Yeah, very similar to that, Alex. So Kathy's daughter claimed to have an imaginary friend named Jody, described as a large pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. Now, while imaginary companions, they're not uncommon in children, Lorraine told me the consistency and the detail of those descriptions combined with other reported phenomena contributed to the growing sense that something in the house was interacting with the family in a way that was not easily explained. So, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case is the rapid escalation of events. What begins as subtle discomfort quickly develops into something far more aggressive. George reported waking at precisely 3:15 in the morning, multiple nights, Same time frame which the DeFeo unalivings are believed to have occurred. And that detail, whether coincidental or not, adds a layer of psychological weight that I think it's difficult to ignore. So the repetition of that time creates a sense of pattern, as though the house itself were marking the memory of what happened there. Now, the climax of the Lutz's family experience came in the final days of their stay in the house. They described an environment that had become overwhelmingly hostile. Objects moved violently. Doors slammed repeatedly. The sense of being watched, it intensified to the point it couldn't be ignored anymore. And George reportedly reached a state of near complete exhaustion and agitation. And then Kathy described a feeling that the house itself was rejecting them, like pushing them out. So the family finally fled the house just after 28 days. They left behind most of their belongings. That detail is often overlooked, but it's significant. People don't just abandon their possessions lightly. They don't leave behind furniture, clothing, personal items unless the situation has reached the point where staying is no longer an option. And whether one believes their account or not, the decision to leave so abruptly suggests a level of fear. It was not easily dismissed. And as a matter of fact, Lorraine said that they had a clergy member that walked into the Amityville house. There were flies everywhere. There was a massive infestation of flies. And the clergy went into the house and ran out of the house as fast as they could and would not return calls anymore for the Warrens. So in the involvement of investigators, including Ed and Lorraine, brought additional attention to the case, but increased skepticism too. Critics have argued that the story was exaggerated or fabricated, pointing to inconsistencies, financial motives. I think it's valid. The criticism is valid, but I don't think we can dismiss everything. They do not entirely eliminate the possibility that something unusual occurred there, particularly given the consistency of the certain details. Now, from a theological perspective, I believe the Amityville case has often been interpreted as a potential example of demonic infestation and oppression. The progression of events from environmental disturbances, psychological influence, physical manifestations, they all align with patterns described in historical accounts and with such phenomena. And the association with a violent crime adds another dimension, because it raises the possibility that the emotional and spiritual residue of that event may have contributed to what followed. Ultimately, the Amityville Horror remains a case that resists definitive explanation. But what makes it endure is not simply the events themselves, but the questions that they raise. If the experiences reported by the Lutz family were genuine, then they suggest that a place can become something more than a structure, something that retains, reflects, even amplifies. Now, what I think happened is in this particular home, because of the DeFeo unalivings, many people say that type of energy imprints in the environment. So that negative poltergeist, negative energy has imprinted in the environment. I think when you have that, along with George Lutz getting involved in things that he should not have gotten involved with, he was really heavy into some dark stuff. And the fact that he was heavy in some dangerous stuff, I think that tapped into the negativity that was already imprinted in the home from the DeFeo unalivings. And that invitation caused the activity to just exacerbate the issue. I believe that the Amityville was, in fact, I think there was something going on in that home. And Lorraine was 100% convinced. She saw it, that there was something there. Yep, The Exorcist, I do believe, yes. And I'm going to do a presentation on that as well one day, but not right now. There we go. It's kind of crazy. My iPad keeps losing color. Okay. Keep in mind, everybody, that I have two computers. I have this computer here and I have this computer here. So on this computer, we're running on multiple platforms, including our unexplained network, which will be going here on a break here in just a second. I do believe that the Amityville horror was the house was legitimate. Now, again, understand everyone, as I mentioned. So I served the church as an exorcist, and the presiding archbishop for the United States Old Catholic Church. I'm a Benedictine monk with the Old Catholic Benedictines of Immaculate Mary. I've been in the paranormal field for 35 years. I've investigated. I have thousands of homes through the years. I'd never charged for my ministry. I don't receive a stipend or salary as being a bishop. I do this ministry 100% free. 100% free. And I don't charge. I never have in 25 years. I have blessed thousands of homes through the years. I have performed 35 exorcisms on people who are truly possessed. And I work with psychiatrists before I even consider an exorcism. Again, homes are not possessed. Homes cannot be possessed. There's no such thing. Homes have it's demonic infestation. Homes or buildings are infested. That's different. Human beings are possessed. Objects are not possessed. For example, the Raggedy Ann doll, Annabelle, is not possessed. It has a demonic attachment. And that demonic attachment makes it look as if something is being animated like Annabelle. But before we go into the Enfield Poltergeist next, let's take a quick break for our Unexplained Network friends.
The conversation around UFOs has never been more serious or more complicated. On Saturday, March the 28th, from noon to 5 p.m. Eastern, the Unexplained Network presents UFO Audit, a digital conference taking a hard look at the current state of the UFO movement, featuring Micah Hanks, John Burroughs, Chiago Tchetti, and David Marler. 4 respected voices. No hype. Just real analysis. This is a free virtual event, so come be a part of the discussion and register now at theunexplainednetwork.com. That's theunexplainednetwork.com. The paranormal field is changing, and now, more than ever, it's time for professionals to lead the way. Join the Oz Professional Paranormal Investigators Association, a global network of serious investigators dedicated to raising the standard of real paranormal research. Access professional certifications, advanced training, and courses exploring true investigation, psychic phenomena. If you're a real paranormal investigator, be a part of the group defining the future. Join today. Visit ozinstitute.org. That's ozinstitute.org. The new book, How to Research a Haunted House, by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from Unex Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to research a haunted house can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unexmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unexmedia.com or amazon.com.
Okay, so now we're back on air everywhere. Again, go to make sure you go to unxnetwork.com. Let's get into and then I'll get to your questions. I promise you, I'll get to your questions once we kind of get over some of these cases. The Enfield Poltergeist case is fascinating. And I talked to Lorraine about this as well. I talked to Lorraine about all these cases. There are certain cases in paranormal history that remain disturbing, not because of a single event, but because of the sheer number of witnesses who experienced something that they couldn't explain. And the Enfield Poltergeist is one of those cases. And that makes it particularly, I think, unsettling. It's not simply the claims that were made, but the consistency of those claims, across multiple individuals, including neighbors, police officers, and investigators. So unlike stories that rely, like on a single perspective where someone could say, I don't know about that one, this case unfolds through a pattern of reported events that build upon one another, gradually moving from minor disturbances to something far more invasive. And then it becomes difficult to dismiss. So for those of you who don't know about this, the Enfield Poltergeist case, it began in 1977, a modest home in Enfield, North London, where a single mom, Peggy Hogston, lived with her children. There was nothing unusual about the home itself. I mean, it was one of many similar houses, quite unremarkable. It was kind of a place where the daily life follows a predictable routine. But the sense of normalcy is important because it establishes the contrast between what the house was and what it became. And when the disturbances began, they did not announce themselves in a dramatic or unmistakable way. Instead, they emerged gradually in a manner that invited explanation rather than fear. So Peggy, the mom, later described the first incident as a simple noise, something that could easily have been ignored if it had not repeated itself. So she reported hearing knocking sounds that came from within the walls. A detail that's, it's on, it might not seem particularly alarming. The pipes do this. Houses make noises, especially older ones. The initial reaction was to attribute the sounds to something natural. However, the knocking did not behave in a way that aligned with any mechanical or environmental cause. It didn't follow a pattern. It didn't respond to anything within the house. Instead, it occurred unpredictable. I mean, it was unpredictable, sometimes faint, sometimes strong enough to demand attention. What made this early stage of the case more unsettling was the way the sound seemed to respond to interaction. So Peggy reportedly attempted to communicate with whatever was producing the knocking, asking it to repeat the sound in response to her question. Thank you. And according to her account, the knocking did respond, creating a pattern. It suggests that something more than just random noises. See, this interaction, whether interpreted as coincidence or something else, it marked a shift in the perception of the event. So the sounds were no longer background disturbances. They became something that appeared to acknowledge the presence of the family. There was intent behind it, intelligence, yeah. So the situation escalated when the children began to experience disturbances in their bedroom. Janet Hogston, who would later become the central figure in this case, reported that her bed began to shake violently, moving in a way that couldn't be explained easily. She described being unable to control the movement, as though like the bed itself had become animated. And her brother corroborated aspects of these events, stating that the furniture in the room appeared to shift and move without anyone touching it. Interesting, by the way, this same phenomena occurred with, just say, Rob Doe of the Exorcist case. Now, these accounts were not isolated. They weren't confined to a single moment. They occurred repeatedly. So Ronald Doe many times he was in his classroom and his desk would begin to shake violently. So one of the most significant aspects of the Enfield case is the involvement of witnesses outside the immediate family. So a neighbor, Vic Nottingham, reported seeing a chair move across the floor without anyone near it. And his account is particularly important because it introduces, I think, an external perspective. Someone who had no initial reason to believe that, anything unusual was occurring. And according to his statement, the chair moved in a way that could not be attributed to any visible force, like sliding across the room as though it was being pushed, by something that could not be seen. And the involvement of law enforcement, well, that even further complicates attempts to dismiss the case. A police officer, WPC Carolyn Heaps, witnessed a chair moving on its own, thank you very much, and later stated that she had checked it for wires or any form of trickery, found nothing that could explain what she saw. This is a police officer. So this detail is often cited because it represents a trained observer encountering something that did not fit within conventional explanations. And while it does not prove paranormal cause, it certainly adds a layer of credibility that's difficult to ignore. And as the disturbances continued, the case took on a more disturbing character. Janet began to exhibit behaviors that were described as abnormal, difficult to explain. She reportedly experienced episodes in which she appeared to lose control of her body, speaking in a voice that did not sound like her own. Now, we're going out of poltergeist here. Poltergeist means noisy ghost. It's not a ghost at all. Poltergeist is negative energy that someone is omitting because they're going through extreme emotional stress. It's energy. You walk down the street, someone is coming towards you. You don't know that person, but that person is emitting such negative energy, you don't want to know them. And you go across the street. That's energy. So when a family or individual is going through extreme emotional distress, you have poltergeist activity. The number one form of destruction with poltergeist is fire. So the voice that happened in Janet, thank you very much, often described as rough and guttural, claimed to belong to an entity that identified itself as an older man who had died in the house. Now, the voice provided details about the allegedly identity of the individual, including statements how he lived, how he died, which, by the way, they were later investigated by researchers. One of the most unsettling aspects of these vocalizations is the way they were described by those who heard them. Witnesses reported that the voice seemed to originate from Janet, but it did not align with her normal speech pattern. It was deeper, more strained, at times appeared to continue even when her mouth was not moving in a way that would normally produce such sound. Now, recordings of these events have been analyzed. And while some have argued that they could be explained by vocal manipulation, others have pointed out that sustaining such a voice for extended periods would be physically difficult, particularly for a child. How do you remove a poltergeist? You have to find the person who's emitting that stress and remove them from the home, and that individual has to get the help that they need to reduce that anxiety. You still may have residual activity, but the residual activity will be quite different compared to you bring that person back into the home and then you're going to have the activity started all back up. So Janet herself described the experience in a way that suggests a lack of control. She stated she felt that as though something was taking over her, forcing her to speak in a way she couldn't consciously direct. So the sense of being overridden, losing agency over one's body, that's a recurring theme in cases that are interpreted with a theological framework as oppression or obsession. It introduces the possibility that the phenomena was not merely external, but was interacting with the individual on a more direct level. And the physical manifestations of the disturbances continued to escalate. Objects were reportedly thrown across rooms, sometimes with enough force to suggest intent, rather than just random movement. Furniture shifted, doors opened, closed. The sense of being watched became a constant presence in the house. And the family described an atmosphere that felt heavy, so the air itself had changed. It's a common description in cases where individuals feel their environment has become hostile. So investigators, like Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, spent extensive time in the house documenting the events. And their involvement is significant because it provides a level of observation that extends beyond anecdotal reporting. And they recorded numerous incidents, conducted interviews, attempted to analyze the phenomena within a structured framework. And while they acknowledge that some incidents may have been exaggerated and perhaps even fabricated by the kids, they maintain that the substantial portion of the activity could not be explained. And that acknowledgement introduces a complexity that's often overlooked. So the presence of some questionable behavior does not necessarily invalidate the entire case. Instead, I think it suggests that the situation was dynamic. It involved both genuine experiences and potential attempts to cope with or respond to those experiences. And that complexity is part of what makes the Enfield case so difficult to categorize definitively. From a theological perspective, I think the events reported in the Enfield align with patterns associated with poltergeist activity, more extreme interpretation, stages of demonic influence, and the progression from environmental disturbances to physical interaction and vocal manifestations. Well, that reflects a structure that has been documented in historical accounts. However, as with all such cases, interpretation depends on the framework one chooses to apply. Now, of course, Lorraine, she helped with the case, but she absolutely believed there was something there. What remains undeniable is the impact of these events on those who experienced them. The family lived in an environment where ordinary rules of reality appeared to be suspended. Objects moved without cause, voices spoke without clear origin. The boundary between the internal and external became increasingly blurred. And the Enfield Poltergeist case endures not because it provides clear answers, but because it raises questions that remains unresolved. I think it challenges assumptions about what's possible and how perception and reality interact. And it forces consideration of the possibility that there are experiences that do not fit neatly within the categories that, we used to understand the world. So if I think this is a true case, I think the question is not simply what happened in that house, but what it suggests about the nature of such phenomena more broadly. Because if something can observe and respond in the way that it did, then it's not passive. It's not residual. It is aware. Residual means it repeats itself. There's no intellect. There's no intent. It was aware. And once something becomes aware, the idea that it might choose to remain, to continue, to wait becomes far more difficult to ignore. It's based on a true story. Yeah. Okay, I want to get into, I don't know if we're going to be all of them. Oh, gosh. We're going to do the Perron family case, the Conjuring, and then we're going to do the Annabelle. Okay. Yeah, because there's a lot here. I always do. I have about 95 pages of notes. Okay. The Conjuring house. If you want to really know what happened in the Conjuring house, you need to look up House of Darkness, House of Light by Andrea Perron. Andrea Perron grew up in the house. She was there. She was one of the children. She witnessed the entire event, everything. And if you truly want to know about what really happened in The Conjuring, you need to purchase those. It's a trilogy. It's fantastic books. There are certain homes that seem to exist comfortably within the ordinary world. From the outside, they appear peaceful, even inviting. Nothing to suggest that anything unusual has ever taken place within the walls. They sit quietly in an open land or along quiet roads, blending into their surroundings so completely that no one would ever question them. The farmhouse in Harrisfield, Rhode Island, associated with the Perron family haunting, was one of those places. It did not look threatening, did not announce its history. It did not warn the family who moved into the space that they were entering was not as empty as it appeared. When the Perron family purchased the property in 1971, they believed they were beginning a new chapter of their lives. The house itself was old, dating back to the 18th century, but there was nothing outwardly alarming about that fact. I mean, many homes in New England carry long histories, and age does not suggest anything unusual. For Roger and Carolyn Perron and their 5 daughters, the house represented space and privacy, a sense of independence that they had not previously experienced. It was rural, quiet, removed from distractions of the outside world. What they did not anticipate was that the isolation of the property would become one of the most unsettling aspects of their experience. See, at first, the disturbances were so subtle that they could easily be dismissed as part of adjusting to an old home. Objects would be misplaced. Small items would appear in locations that had not been left. And there were occasional sounds that did not have an obvious source. These are the kinds of things that happen in many households. They rarely attract much attention. However, what made these incidents different was the consistency which they occurred and the way they seemed to increase over time. So Carolyn Perron, she was the first to sense that something in the house wasn't right. She described an atmosphere that felt heavy, as though the air itself carried a presence that could not be seen but felt. And the sensation was not tied to a specific room or a moment. It was pervasive, following her from one part of the house to another. She later explained that it felt as though she was being watched, not in a fleeting or uncertain way, but with a steady awareness that it did not diminish, even when she tried to ignore it. Now, the children experienced their own disturbances, though at first they were less overtly frightening. They reported hearing sounds at night, footsteps in the hallways, doors opening and closing, faint voices that seemed to come from distant parts of the house. These sounds were often dismissed, imagination, or just natural noises of an old structure settling. However, as the occurrences continued, the explanations became harder to maintain. And one of the daughters later described waking during the night to the sound of someone walking the hallway outside her bedroom. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the corridor to the other. She listened, expecting the sound to be followed by the opening of another door, movement of a family member. Instead, the footsteps stopped abruptly. In silence. When she looked into the hallway, there was no one there. And this experience, while not immediately terrifying for some, created a sense of unease. And as time passed, the disturbances began to take on more distinct character. Objects were no longer simply misplaced. They were moved in ways that suggest intention. Chairs were shifted. Items were hidden and then returned. And there were moments when the family felt that their actions were being observed. Some cases even anticipated. And that perception of awareness, it's a recurring theme in the Perron case. It's not one of the elements. I think it's one of those elements that makes it particularly unsettling. It suggests not just presence, but an interaction. And Carolyn's experience, the mother, became increasingly intense. She reported being physically touched on multiple occasions, often when she was alone. And these encounters were described as sudden, unmistakable, involving a sensation of pressure rather than a light or simple contact. So in one account, she described feeling a hand on her body that she could not attribute to any visible source. The sensation was strong enough, she reacted physically, turning to confront what she believed must be behind her. Nothing was there. And these experiences, they were accompanied by visual manifestations that were described as shadowy figures or full apparitions. Some were fleeting, appearing only for like moments and disappearing. Others were more defined. And one of the daughters later described seeing a figure standing in her room at night, watching her. The figure did not move. It did not speak. It simply remained silent, still, and then vanished. And the lack of movement and sound made the experience even more disturbing. It suggested a deliberate presence rather than just like a random residual image. And over time, the family began to piece together fragments of the house's story. It was through this process that the name Bathsheba Sherman emerged. Now, according to some local accounts, Bathsheba had lived in the area in the 19th century, had been associated with rumors of dark practices. While historical records do not fully support the more extreme claims, the persistence of these stories contributed to the way the family interpreted their experience is interesting. So Carolyn became increasingly convinced that one of the presents in the house was connected to Bathsheba. And this presence was not merely passive. She described it as hostile, particularly toward her, and believed that it was responsible for many of the more aggressive incidents that occurred. And that belief intensified the sense of fear within the house. And it introduced the idea that the activity wasn't random, it was actually targeted. So the situation reached a critical point when the family sought assistance, leading to the involvement of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their investigation of the house brought additional attention to the case, introduced a more formal framework. Now, Lorraine told me that she described the presence within the house as multiple entities, some of which were benign, they didn't feel threatening, and others were not. And I think that distinction is important. It suggests a layered environment in which different forms of activity coexist. And one of the most disturbing events associated with the Perron case occurred during an attempt to confront or communicate with the presence believed to be Bathsheba. Lorraine brought in a psychic, and Andrea believes, I spoke to Andrea about this, Andrea believed that that was the catalyst that caused the case to explode. Because Carolyn reportedly entered a trance-like state in this seance kind of a thing they were trying to have, during which her behavior and mannerism changed significantly. Witnesses described her as speaking in a voice it did not sound like her own, exhibiting movements that were described as unnatural or beyond her control. And whether interpreted as psychological paranormal, it has a profound impact on the family, reinforced the belief that something within the house was capable of influencing them. There was some form of levitation from my understanding, From a theological perspective, the progression of events in the Perron case aligns with patterns described in the case of infestation and oppression and obsession. The disturbances begin with environmental anomalies, such as sounds, objects moving, and progresses into the physical and psychological interaction that focuses on specific individuals. Now, that progression suggests a shift from passive presence to an active engagement, transition. That's central to interpretation. Regardless of the framework applied, the impact on the family is undeniable. The house, which was initially seen as a place of opportunity and comfort, became a source of fear. What makes the Perron case particularly enduring is not just the events themselves, but the implication that those events carried. The idea that a house can hold on to its past in a way that affects the present, challenges the assumption that time creates distance. And it's interesting because the new owner of that house, all hell broke loose. And that's typical. This is the last thing that we're going to get into your questions. The Annabelle case. So again, I did have the opportunity to see Annabelle. I saw Annabelle in Lexington, Kentucky. And there is no question that there's you can feel a demonic attachment to Annabelle. Father Bob Bailey is a friend of mine, and he is the one that he's a Roman Catholic priest, and he was there's Annabelle. And you definitely feel a sense, you sense something evil there. But let's get into this, the Annabelle. There is something about objects that makes people lower their guard. A house can feel threatening. A dark hallway can feel dangerous. But an object, especially something small, something familiar, a Raggedy Ann doll, does not immediately trigger fear. It sits quietly, it does not move on its own in obvious ways, so it doesn't demand attention. It's precisely why the Annabelle case has remained one of the most unsettling cases in paranormal history. It challenges the assumption that danger must appear dangerous. So instead, it presents something that looks harmless, something that invites trust, then gradually reveals behavior that becomes impossible to ignore. So the case began in the early 1970s when a young nursing student named Donna, she received a Raggedy Ann doll as a gift from her mom. There was nothing unusual about the doll itself. It was not an antique. It wasn't damaged. It didn't carry any known history. It was simply a toy, the kind that would normally be placed on a bed or a chair, left without a second thought. So Donna kept the doll in her apartment, which she shared with her roommate named Angie. And at first, there was nothing to suggest the doll was anything more than what it appeared to be. The first indication that something was wrong did not come in the form of something dramatic. Instead, came through small, almost dismissible changes. And like in the doll's position, Donna would leave the doll on her bed before leaving the apartment, only return to find it in a different location. Sometimes it would be on the couch, sometimes in another room entirely. At first, the assumption was simple. Someone had moved it. Either Donna or Angie must have picked it up without remembering. And that explanation held out for a time. It's the most natural response to something that does not immediately appear threatening. However, the movements became more specific and more difficult to explain. The doll was not simply relocated, it was positioned. It would be found sitting upright with its legs crossed, leaning against objects in a way that suggested deliberate placement. So these were not positions that would occur naturally if the doll had simply fallen or been shifted occasionally. The arrangement of the doll began to suggest something more intentional, something that was not easily attributed to forgetfulness. And as the days passed, the activity escalated. Notes began to appear within the apartment, written on parchment paper that neither Donna or Angie kept in their home. These notes contained short messages such as "help me" or "help us," written in what appeared to be childlike handwriting. And the presence of these notes introduced a new level of disturbance, suggested communication. And the idea that something within the apartment could not only move objects, but also produce written messages, well, it shifted the experience from unusual to deeply unsettling. Donna later described the feeling that accompanied these events as one of growing unease rather than immediate fear. It was not that she believed something dangerous was present, but that something wasn't right. And that's what Lorraine described it to me. The difference between those two perceptions, I think it's important. because it reflects the gradual nature of the escalation. Fear did not appear suddenly. It developed over time, as each new occurrence made it more difficult to maintain a rational explanation. So the situation took a more disturbing turn when a friend of the women, Lou, began to express concern about the doll. Lou reportedly felt uncomfortable around it, describing a sense that something about it was wrong. And according to his account, he experienced a vivid dream in which the doll appeared to climb onto his chest, attempt to strangle him. Now, dreams often reflect subconscious fears or anxieties. Lou insisted that the experience felt different, more vivid, more physical than a typical dream. What makes Lou's account particularly unsettling is what followed. He later reported waking to find scratches on his bodies, markings that appear suddenly without explanation. Now, there's a term called dermatographia. And dermatographia is when markings can appear on your body, but that can be explained logically. So, but in this case, they would just appear suddenly with no explanation. Now, that's not dermatographia. Yes, this is the Annabelle story. And these scratches were described as fresh and painful, as though they had been inflicted by something physical. And such injuries can be attributed to a variety of causes. The timing, context of their appearance contributed to the growing sense that something within the apartment was not merely passive. So for those of you who are just joining us, I'm talking about the Annabelle story, the true story directly from Lorraine Warren, my friend, who had passed away. Now, as the disturbances continued, Donna and Angie sought an explanation through spiritual means. She contacted a medium, and they conducted a seance in the apartment. And according to the medium, the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins was attached to the doll. The story presented was that the child had died on the property years earlier and was seeking comfort or companionship. The idea of a child's spirit, while unsettling, was also somewhat reassuring to them. It suggested vulnerability rather than threat, and it allowed the women to interpret the activity as something that required compassion rather than fear. This interpretation, however, did not resolve the situation. I made that, Deb. I was very vocal about that. How do you feel about her being brought out to events? Well, first of all, as I said earlier in the presentation, Ed and Lorraine Warren brought Annabelle out often to universities. So all these people who are talking and who write all these articles and go on social media as if they knew Lorraine Warren, they didn't know Lorraine Warren. They never had the opportunity to speak to her. I was friends with Lorraine Warren. I spoke to her many times about Annabelle and the cases. And Ed and Lorraine brought Annabelle often to universities to talk about cases and demonic cases. So this idea that people went on social media, oh, Lorraine said you should never, ever take her out. That's not true. That's simply not true. They're just talking nonsense. So they brought them many times to universities. Now, that interpretation, however, did not resolve the situation. Instead, it appeared to intensify it. The activity became more frequent. The sense of unease within the apartment deepened. And it was at that point that the case came to the attention of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who approached the situation from a different perspective. The Warrens rejected the idea that the presence associated with the doll was that of a child. I firmly agree with this. Instead, they suggested that the entity was something else entirely, something that was presenting itself as harmless in order to gain trust 100%. Within a theological framework, this concept aligns with the idea of deception as a characteristic of malevolent entities. The notion that something could imitate vulnerability in order to establish a presence introduces a level of intentionality that's deeply unsettling. And according to their assessment, Lorraine told me the doll itself was not the source of the activity, but rather it was a conduit, a focal point. The entity was believed to be using the doll as a means of interacting with the environment, creating the illusion that the object itself was animated. And that distinction is significant because it shifts the focus from the physical object to the presence behind it. The doll becomes a symbol, a visible representation of something that cannot be seen. The Warrens reportedly warned that the situation could escalate if left unaddressed, suggesting that the entity's behavior was consistent with patterns that begin with subtle interaction and progress toward more direct and potential harmful engagement. And they were right. Okay. Whatever, Macy. I don't see you here doing this. These people are so demonically impressed. Anyway, this progression, which mirrors other cases, yes, you're right. I'm not affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church. We don't allow pedophilia. This progression, which mirrors other cases of alleged oppression, reflects a structure in which initial trust or curiosity is gradually replaced by fear or loss of control. Now, ultimately, the doll was removed from the apartment and taken into the care of the Warrens, where it was placed in secure display case. The removal of the doll reportedly ended in disturbances by Donna and Angie, and though the broader implication of the case remained. Now, the idea that an entity could attach itself to an object presents itself in a way that encourages trust and then escalates its behavior over time. Perhaps I think the most disturbing aspect of this case is the idea that something was not only present but aware. The movement of the doll, the appearances of notes, the reported physical interactions, all suggest a level of engagement that goes beyond random or residual phenomena. They simply, they imply observation, response, and adaptation. And if that's the case, then the question is not simply whether something was attached to that object, which it is, but what that attachment represents. Because if something can use an object in that way, it can present itself as harmless in order to establish a presence. Then the boundary between what we perceive as safe and what may actually be dangerous becomes far less clear. This is why people who tell you that using the Ouija board, not scary at all, because that's what they'll tell you. Oh, I played with it 100 times and nothing has ever happened. And that's exactly what the demons want you to think, because it gives you a sense of safety. And then it enters. So the doll remains contained, placed behind the glass as a precaution. And again, I saw it. It was no question, in my opinion, there was something attached to Annabelle. There's no question. And you can feel it. You can absolutely feel that presence. If you have questions, you can throw them out there. And I'm going to go into some of our paranormal Friday paranormal stories. So that is the presentation on the Warrens, and hope that you have enjoyed it. It was a lot of information. I tried to go as fast as I could because we have to close shop here. Yeah, this is it's fascinating, isn't it? Some of these are just, when you break these down, and man, it's just so much. Okay. Yeah, let's go into this. I want to get into some paranormal stories, if you don't mind, because it helps me, so we need to do this. Okay, listen to this. It's a paranormal. So we're doing paranormal stories. We'll do a few of them, and hopefully you'll enjoy this. Okay. Yeah, I studied for the Roman Catholic priesthood for 6 years, received my minor orders. I actually studied. I was in graduate school. I studied. I'm very, very familiar with canon law and the catechism of the Roman Catholic Church. And so God called me here. So here I am. Okay. A woman who returned from death is now allegedly receiving supernatural sensories. When Louisa Peck's heart stopped beating decades ago, she believed that it was the end. Instead, it was only the beginning of something far darker. As she lay lifeless on the floor of a crowded nightclub, victim of a drink that was tainted with something sinister, Louisa felt herself pulled from her body, rushing upward into a violent, silent void. And beyond the darkness, she found a realm, unlike any dream, a place where time dissolved. Familiar faces waited. They were her ancestors, she said, but their eyes glowed with an otherworldly awareness, as if they guarded secrets not meant for her or the living. When consciousness slammed back into her body, people were bent over her, forcing air into her lungs. And the mortal world felt heavy, suffocating, and cold, she said. Yet that night did not leave her unchanged. See, in the years since, Louisa swears that she's been haunted by her return. She claims she sees those who no longer walk among us now, shadows whispering at the edges of her vision, eyes watching from drowned corners of the world. And she says that she can glimpse the moment death will claim someone, a knowledge that chills her as much as the grave itself. Once she claims to see a figure rising from a swamp, half fog, half memory. Another time she felt the sharp sorrow of knowing her unborn nephew's spirit would never draw breath. Now, Louisa believes these grim insights are the lingering mark of her passage through death's door, a gift or a curse that binds her to both worlds. Now in her 60s, she says her experience left her with a strange conviction that consciousness itself is endless and that every pulse of love and thought forms really create the universe. And yet when she speaks of it, her words carry the hush of someone who has stared into the abyss and found it staring back. Interesting story, isn't it? Here's a true story. I'm still an exorcist. Yep, I just performed my 35th exorcism. Listen to this one. For those of you who are not aware, the Vatican has said more exorcists are needed. So inside the echoing halls of the Vatican, where ancient prayers linger in the air like incense, a gathering of priests met beneath the watchful gaze of sacred statues. They came not for celebration, but for counsel. See, these men belong to a secret fellowship, the International Association of Exorcists, and the message they carried by Pope Leo was anything but comforting. The exorcist spoke of an unsettling pattern spreading across the world, souls disturbed by what they called the extraordinary actions of the demonic, a hush of possession that's entering through modern life. They claim that those who delve into occult sects and forbidden practices are awakening something dark, something patient, something hungry. Though details are scarce, their words painted a grim picture. Rumors of strange affliction, unnatural voices, and eyes that do not belong to the living have begun to surface. Some whisper that entire communities are slipping beneath a veil of unseen torment. The priest pleaded for aid, urging the Pope to send more exorcists, one or several for every diocese, to combat this rising spiritual plague. Pope Leo has called their work a necessity, yet his next move remains shrouded in silence. Outside the walls of the church, skepticism still reigns. Many see the ancient rite as a relic of darker times when madness was mistaken for possession. But believers remember the tragedy. People who do not survive the rituals, victims whose faith led them into fatal battles with unseen foes. Now, even now, beneath the glow of electric lights and the hum of the modern world, the same question lingers, like a breath on the back of the neck. If evil truly walks among us, who will stand against it when the prayer ends? So there we go. I don't need any more cases. I'm good. And this is not a paranormal. This is actually interesting for those of you who love space. I want to share this with you. NASA shifts a strategy. Lunar Gateway transformed into Surface First Moon Initiative. NASA has announced a significant change in its vision for lunar exploration, redirecting focus from the long-planned Lunar Gateway orbital station to a permanent base directly on Moon's surface. So the update comes as preparations for Artemis 2, the agency's first crewed mission around the moon, which remains scheduled for launch on April the 1st. Despite excitement surrounding this mission, NASA's leaders now believe that building lasting infrastructure on the moon itself offers a more direct path towards sustainable exploration. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman explained that while the Gateway project was originally designed as a way station for lunar and deep space missions, priorities have shifted toward developing a foothold on the lunar surface. Components already produced for the Gateway will now be adapted to support the goal. Quote, it shouldn't come as a surprise that we've adjusted course, Isaacman said during a recent briefing at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. By redirecting Gateway assets and leveraging our international partnerships, we can accelerate surface operations and build a foundation for long-term lunar activity. Well, the revised plan outlines a several-year roadmap to establish habitable lunar base, where astronauts will be able to live and work for extended periods on the moon. However, several details remain under discussion, including which spacecraft will ferry astronauts between Earth and the lunar outpost. Now, while the Lunar Gateway was originally envisioned as a vital stepping stone for returning humans to the moon, NASA's new strategy signals a bolder, more immediate approach, bringing humanity's next frontier directly to the surface of another world. There we go. I personally think, I just wonder if this is also going to be used for military reasons. Let's go into a UFO talk, but this is fascinating. U.S. lawmaker hints at imminent release of classified UFO files. A United States representative has offered fresh clues about the government's upcoming release of long classified materials related to UFOs and extraterrestrial phenomena, a move that could reignite global interest in one of the most debated subjects in modern history. In February, President Donald Trump unexpectedly directed federal agents to begin the process of declassifying, releasing UFO and alien-related records, sparking widespread speculation about what might soon come to light. Well, now, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who chairs the task force on the declassification of federal secrets, has confirmed that the process is moving forward and hinted that the documents could be accompanied by video evidence that defies explanation. Quote, "I think they're very serious about doing it," Luna said during a recent appearance on Keeping It Real with Julian Michaels. "Once we have the official declassification order, I intend to hold a press conference to share everything that we've authorized to see and disclose." However, Luna tempered expectation, noting that the release may not include the entirety of the government's UFO archive. She says, "I think people will see some fascinating material," she added, "but I doubt there will ever be a full admission. The government will share the evidence, but not necessarily the interpretation." Now, adding fuel to speculation, recent reports suggest that U.S. government has quietly registered 2 domain names. I talked about this last week, alien.gov and aliens.gov, possibly in preparation for hosting the forthcoming files. For now, no official timeline has been announced for when the documents will be made public. Still, while mounting political support and growing public pressure for transparency, it seems increasingly likely that a closer look at what's been hidden in federal archives could be on the horizon. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, it's like, just bring it. Let us see it. Yeah, let us see it. This next one, I want to talk very quickly. Doha, Qatar. That's a tongue tie. Doha, Qatar. A triangle UFO formation was seen over Doha, Qatar. It was just after 7 p.m., March 25th, 2026, when a thunderstorm swept over Doha. In Qatar, something strange appeared in the sky. 3 glowing orbs broke through the storm clouds, hanging in a perfect triangle formation. The light didn't flicker with the lightning. They moved slowly, silently, as if gliding with purpose. Now, witnesses watched as the lights hovered over the city, unmoving for several minutes, before they vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of thunder of few grainy clips that spread quickly online. Experts offered explanation: rare ball lightning, strange electrical plasma, maybe even high-tech drones, but none could explain why 3 lights would move in unison or how they could survive inside of active storm. No radar picked them up. No pilots reported them. No one claimed responsibility. Was it a rare atmospheric anomaly? Something else watching from the clouds? For now, Doha triangle lights remain unexplained. A quiet mystery suspended between science and the unknown. Pretty fascinating. Boy, I tell you what, I would love to continue, but we have to close this up. For those of you who are listening to this on podcast, I say good night to you guys. Yeah, we go fast, don't we? We go fast. So, here's what we're going to do. For those of you who do not know, we will have our night prayer coming up at the top of the hour, and then during night prayer, I always turn the chat off. And but afterwards, we didn't get to many because I had so much to talk about today. But if you want to chat with us tonight after night prayer, we turn the chat back on. Thank you very much. At 10:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I'm going to have to run because we have to get ready for night prayer. So for those of you on all the presentations, remember, I tell you, your value does not decrease based on someone's inability or refusal to see your worth. You're priceless. And don't let anybody tell you or convince you otherwise. Good night.